going? Cooking. Henry. I won't feel bad if you miss this. I know it's wicked late or wicked early. I appreciate you hanging out, but please don't feel attached. Next time I'm gonna try to stream it 4 o'clock. So hopefully that'll be a little bit better, but we shall see. Okie dokie. That's right. Can't stop you. Okay. Other folks are all here. We're going to be creating on stream a diagram of a core loop and also talking a little bit about core loops or just gameplay loops in general. So we can determine, well, we'll talk about what they are, why they're important, and how they can vent some of your players into the ether. This is going to be relevant discussion for games industry, just video games in general, and TTRPGs as well. Though TTRPGs have an extra layer of complexity that I think will be really interesting to explore. So we're actually going to be doing this all in Photoshop. So we shall see how it goes. We'll just try to keep chat up there and work it all at the same time. Okay, so core loops in general. Let's define it as. Let me know if the yellow is obnoxious. We could change it to something else. But we're going to define our core loop as the most fun, fundamentally. So that's a really awful description, but it'll set the premise for the rest of the episode here. So when we're thinking about just a loop in general, when it comes to games, think about what happens, and we'll start with a really simple example in Overwatch. Their core loop, I mean, there's numerous, and then they're nested in one another, and we'll get to that in a bit. But their core loop is that you turn on the game. You start in the lobby as you queue up for a match. You play the match, and then you get kicked out and are given some rewards, and then you do the whole thing over and over again. That's the objective side of that core loop. Now you can create smaller loops within that when it comes to the micro of play, and we'll get to that as well. So we're gonna do this really, really down and dirty. And but that's what? I'm functionally incapable of using Photoshop right now. That's the gist of it. And also what we're going to be drawing upon as we go through and create our loops here. So if we start from, let's see, let's start right here. And we'll just do another one down here. So typically it's easiest to think about them as groups of 3. So we can think about the objective. So there's an it's in black. Okay. There is an anticipation or an expectation / expectation of reward. And this plays into dopamine. I actually don't like this definition, but I was doing some additional research earlier, and this seems like a really popular way to describe it. So I'm just going to roll with it for now, but we might end up rephrasing this later. So there's an anticipation and then expectation of reward. So you are looking at sitting in the lobby because you know that actually, let me rephrase that. If you're, yeah, no, you're sitting in the lobby so that you can play the game to get the good stuff at the end. So there's the, and then this would be like the activity slash challenge. I would say like the trial, right? Or even just like the the trial or the doing. And then we're going to go down to the payout over here. So this is the payout when you figure out that you have been rewarded for doing the things that you're expecting to receive a reward for. And then this loop feeds into itself over and over and over and over. And there's a trick to it, because if you do another color, so this goes this way, this goes this way, this goes this way. Very, very easy. Oh, my camera's in front of it. Easy to visualize. You could take any single game that exists and it's going to reflect this in some way, even when it comes to like chess. The reason that you match up with somebody, or even if you're playing against yourself, is that you know that by the doing, somebody's going to be a winner. That's a game. If it's just a sandbox and there's no winner, then it's a toy. If there's no structure, it's a toy, not a game. So that being said, why a core loop is important should be pretty obvious. What it does is it keeps players engaged in your experience. Now, when it comes to let's make this a little bit more focused on a specific type of game, right? So this is the general, I guess, more psychological. It's the loop that we're engaging the players in, regardless of what they're actually doing. But now let's focus on the objectives of a game. So a couple of things that you want to think about when we're creating any sort of game at all is, what are the goals? And then say theme of the game. Goals, theme, I think that works. And then we want these to be in alignment with the loop that we're creating for people. For example, if you, okay, so here let's talk about D&D a little bit, because this will make sense. Let's go. Dungeons and Dragons. Nope. D&D. Dynamite. D&D. So Dungeons and Dragons. One of the reasons why you often see sessions. Actually, let's go with the session loop first. So you have a role play. It's usually like an onboarding moment, right? Role play or exploration, and then you'll roll into combat, and then I would say like maybe clean up. It's where you're closing out the session, and then you start it again. And this is, I feel like you can very easily make this unbalanced. So I think we all know that D&D is like, you're playing two separate games. And like there's a role play component of it, and there's like some loose rules for what you can do, and then there's a lot that's up to the GM's discretion. When you enter combat, it becomes more rigid. There's a whole different set of rules that you need to know in order to make the combat work. And this is, I guess I should probably phrase this. So instead of the psychological components, we're talking about the actual like objective, the core gameplay loop. Which I should probably write that. And then we'll put Dungeons and Dragons. Okay. So you have Dungeons and Dragons in the core gameplay loop. And so there's roleplay, or exploration, combat, which again, totally separate rule set, and then some sort of closing out of the session. I'm calling it cleanup here. You could just say that this is 2 stages, right? Like roleplay, exploration, combat, roleplay, exploration, combat. But there's also like sub pillars. So like a puzzle would be a small little micro loop that lives in there. I'll say the cleanup. This is ideally some sort of climax or just the payout that we talked about before. The feel good at the end of the session. If you played D&D before, you don't always get that. Sometimes it can kind of go out on a whimper because people can be strapped for time, or they can, you could have already had the fun part, and then people are using the rest of the time to figure out just like what you're doing next, which can be a little bit deflating. I'm going to give you another example. This is not going to be Dungeons and Dragons. We'll do the One Ring, which I don't know. I have not played it. I've only read some of the book, but their core loop looks like adventure, fellowship, and Yule. So this is their gameplay loop. Adventure could take multiple sessions to complete. You're having a very Lord of the Rings style experience where you're going on a long trip. And then there's a whole separate phase dedicated to, it's basically like the shopping session, but it's about roleplay in particular. It's called Fellowship. That's the phase that makes me nervous. If I were to walk into a game and say, so coming from like a D&D background, right? You kind of had different pillars to experience in the middle of a singular session. And then that's basically kind of all there is. Sometimes we get a shopping episode, but it's not as like adventure, fellowship. That's what happens. And then Yule, which is kind of like a downtime recovery. Oh, camera needs to go in the other corner. Okay, that is a good plan. Easy solution. Okay, thank you. So if we're thinking about the core gameplay loop on the macro, this is what that looks like. And Yule is basically like I believe it's when you get new abilities and your characters like level up. So this is that payout again, because it's the downtime, the relaxation, the refilling of the characters' spirits, and they're getting ready for the next season. I really, really appreciate this about the One Ring RPG. Conceptually, I don't know if I would like to play, like, I don't know if that core loop is totally for me every time. But I'll show you, actually, if we go back to Dungeons and Dragons, just to kind of reiterate the difference again. Roleplay. And this is the macro for Dungeons and Dragons, unless you want to include scheduling, which is its own nightmare. Combat. And then some sort of, hopefully, clean up, close out, pay out. All right. So if you ever wonder why so many sessions start in a tavern, it's because this is the easiest place to onboard players, is this role play section. So when we're looking at the goals of the game, one of the major pillars of Dungeons and Dragons is to become your characters, to explore, do puzzles, solve mysteries, the Scooby-Doo gang sort of situation. And it's a very safe place to onboard a player. So actually, if we go back here, let's talk a little bit about the incorporation of, like, the onboarding. So we'll do it over here. So you've kind of got this little on ramp for roleplay, and that's usually where it starts. So you get them invested in the most accessible part of the game. They loop through. This is where it creates some difficulty, and then close up or some sort of payout, and then back to roleplay. And ideally, they never go through this again. If your game is centered around combat, then dropping them here is probably not the place that you want to do that. It could be. It could be to get them acclimated. Actually, let's start with a kind of a different example. If you have a whole bunch of very experienced veterans who say that they really like combat, you probably want to start them in combat. So this is a different place to onboard. And that's something that we have to think about, because the goals of your game need to align with the core loop that you're creating. All right. So all that stuff is pretty obvious. When we think about venting players, where you lose a player from the experience, I'll show you a really quick example. So if we bring people into combat, and we're going to do, so if we start talking about micro loops, so within combat, there's kind of a game that takes place in itself, and it keeps looping around, right? So the easiest thing is that there's a, so round-based. And I'm gonna, this will make sense. Okay. So I want to give you an example of where you can start venting players from your game if it's not balanced correctly. So once you're in combat, this is a little micro loop that they're going to engage in. You have a round where your enemies are going to attack. You go through all of the players who are playing, all the creatures that are playing. Then it's finally your turn. This is the interesting part for a lot of people. If you take too long in this section, just like waiting for everybody else to go, then that's where you're going to start losing people. And it's not, okay, I don't want to do like weird art. And it may not be the first time. It may be that they just don't come back. So when you're designing a game, just as an example, or designing a session, adding a bunch of mechanics to the play, or not limiting the time that a turn takes, is where you're going to start seeing some fall off. So that's why there's kind of been this, well, one of the reasons why there's kind of been this mad rush to streamline gameplay, because there's a lot of dead time that we've kind of like suffered with. So when you think about the MCDM RPG, which has a different core loop, but the combat loop is still very similar. When you the way the MCDM's RPG works is that you have more things that you can do between turns. So when a creature runs by you, so you don't roll attacks, but there's still a reaction, essentially, where you can take, it's called a chance hit, I think, which is your opportunity attack. And then you just instantly do damage to whatever runs by you. Some characters have the ability to help other allies or on their turns. And you can do, similar threads with like Bardic Inspiration and Silver Barbs and that sort of thing from Dungeons and Dragons. So there's a little bit of interactivity. But if you don't have that, then that's when you get people on their phone. You get people who are, wandering off because it's not their turn. And hopefully the game is still engaging and brings people back, but it might make sense to tighten your core loop there. One of the ways that you can try to do that, just as a GM, would be to make sure that your players are, give them a minute, or you say that, like, okay, you're up on deck, which means after this person, you're going to, it's your turn in the initiative order. You can also, when players are dying, for example, in order to keep them engaged in the experience, again, this is Dungeons and Dragons, which once you fall down, you have like 3 death saving throws. Basically, all you're doing on your turn when that rolls around is you're rolling a dice, seeing if you're getting closer to death or closer to stabilizing. What a GM can do is that you can give like a flashback of something that the characters, something important to the character story, or you can give them like a little piece of information that they can maybe recall just as they're sitting there in their final moments, and make that experience more dramatic, or even like ask them how their character would be feeling in this particular situation. It's not going to work for every group, but when it comes to keeping players engaged in your loop, that's one of the techniques that you can attempt to do. And if you're designing a game, this is just something that you have to keep in mind. So in these micro loops, you want to make sure that people stick around. An example of this for like a game like PlanetSide 2 would be actually, just to make this make sense. So in PlanetSide 2, it would be, okay, we're not going to do that. Okay, spawn, shoot things, and then ultimately die and do it again. There's more than that, but that's basically like the core loop of PlanetSide. And I'm gonna try to get rid of some of my stuff. This, no, this. Okay, it's not working. We'll get rid of. It's taking too long. Onboarding. Get out of here. What's this one? Okay, get out of here. Okay. So the way that we keep people engaged in the shoot things phase, right? So like you've spawned, you're running around, is that when they die, you've gotten progress toward something. So your experience increases. Veteran players don't care necessarily about that, but one of the things that they do care about is in the micro loop. So when you're shooting things, it's a level of it's a couple of different things. So we have directed progress, or just other call them carrots, or you have mastery. So these things that they're constantly making progress toward while they're out shooting things. That could even be part of this, the loop over here, is that when you die, there is a level of recognition or a preparation for the thing that you need to do next. So you got killed by the sniper, you know where the sniper's at, you're going to go fight the sniper, or you're going to go switch your class, that sort of thing. So we present them with, I guess that would be the payout then, is that understanding. Sometimes the payout would be, actually I shouldn't even call this, yeah, die is fine. Say maybe die/kill. but sometimes that payout is going to take place in the shooting things area, right? So you're constantly engaged in this little loop where you're gaining little bits of progress, and that happens over here as well. But this is the core loop for many games, and you can kind of distill any game down into this, and what you want to try to do at that point is keep people engaged in the smaller loops so that they spend more time, not spend more time in that particular loop, but spend more time wanting to go to the next thing. So I guess that would even be like, that would probably be like between here, right? Okay. So let's just blow it all up. Blow it all up. Okie dokie. Yeah, that's fine. Let us... I guess another example that I could bring up is... it's probably like Hades or any sort of roguelike. And it's really fundamental where you're spawning or starting, then you're running through the level, and then you gain progress. I don't really know. I think you all kind of get the point, because this loop is very familiar in any game that you play. So you're spawning, you go get the try to make progress, and then if it's a rogue light game, when you die, you're going to get some sort of reward. In Hades, that's the ability to upgrade things. That's the ability to unlock new weapons, and then you want to do it again, because you run into a during this portion here. This is the challenge, right? You run into something that acts like a barrier, but should make it feel like you can get over it. And that's, I think, the trick. And even when we're talking about Planiside 2, that's the mastery, is that you feel like you're still learning. And even the directive stuff, that you feel like you're still growing without needing to offload it into that sort of progress section. Koki says, you need to die at one point. Dying isn't fun, but you get a reward smaller loop. Dying isn't that bad anymore. Exactly. So that's a really good point too. So when you're designing any sort of like mastery based system, you want there to be, okay, so like playing Overwatch, right? You're going to win some games and lose some games. Ideally, you're winning more games than you're losing, because it makes the frustration more palatable. And this is like where your flow is. I'm pretty sure there's a chart on this, but you want to have okay, because if you're not challenged, then up here you are bored. And if you are not, these axes are really just, I don't think this is how it works. So this would be like time, right? But if you're frustrated, again, this is, okay, I need to restructure this graph. But if you're frustrated, you feel like that time is wasted. Actually, okay, sorry. The axes are driving me nuts, because I hope that you understand what I'm saying, but that's not going to look good on a VOD. So, okay, so flow is the center line here. This is challenge, and this is time. So that's better. So if you have if your challenge is too high, the chances of you quitting are or if your challenge is too high, the chances of you quitting earlier is higher. So the more that you can keep people in this like central line the longer that they're going to be able to play, because the frustration is diminished. But if you don't have challenge, then they're going to get bored, and I don't know that they'll continue playing. But I think these axes are bad too. Hopefully you get what I'm trying to get across though. So when you're designing a loop, ideally there's some level of challenge. So even if it's Dungeons and Dragons, you want challenging combat. What you don't want is losing the character you've invested 6 years into. Well, okay, if you played it for 6 years, you probably deserve to lose it 2 years into. VTS says if it's too easy, always win. You're bored. If you always die too hard, bored. Yeah, that's legit. Okay. Alrighty. Where are we at? I feel like I lost the thread and I'm kind of just all over the place. So why don't we just design a core loop for let's design it for Distal. So what are my goals? The goals for the game would be to should we focus on goals or should we focus on experiences? So let's focus on what we want the players to feel as they're moving through the game. So players, so Distal is very character focused. I'm gonna put this over here. And growing stronger isn't necessarily, I think it's a hook, but it's like a scrap. I think it's more of a result. So we're going to say that we're going to call it narrative evolution. So basically your character is evolving based on the adventures that you undertake in this world. And let's say, and this is very, very macro, like we're way zoomed out on Distal, over the life of a single character and a single, probably, campaign. Let's say that our end goal, and I don't know that it needs to be this, but we want to retire that character. We want to make them feel like they've done a lot in their life, I guess. And then we're eventually they're going to quit adventuring. And again, I don't know that this is the loop, but we're going to run it as like a thought experiment. So if I were designing Distal, let's think about the pillars. So actually, let me back up. So what's the core gameplay loop? It'd be like Dungeons and Dragons, where you go on an adventure, and then I guess it's more like the One Ring at this point. So you set out for the adventure. You're probably going to have some sort of conflict, not necessarily combat. And then, okay, now I think I'm drilling into the micro at this point, but it's fine. And then you're going to have some sort of, I would say even like a catharsis. That seems a little dramatic. But let's call it that for the sake of exploration. So if this is my core loop, where do we onboard the characters? Probably right at the adventure. So this is where we're gonna onboard. And again, this is why you have a lot of games that start in an inn, because it's safe, and you can kind of like feel out what you're trying to do. The other component of this, though, and I should talk about this for a quick second, is that tabletop role-playing games are inherently different from video games because of how you interact with the people there. Everyone is having a combined experience versus a siloed experience. So even when you're playing like Call of Duty, there might be a bunch of other people with you, but it's not, it's still very personal. You're going around, you're killing the people, you're doing whatever. I would say in Planetside 2, that broadens a little bit. In World of Warcraft, if you're raiding, that probably broadens a little bit, but you're still focused on your job. You don't care necessarily so much about the experience that the other players are having. When you're in a more intimate setting, like a tabletop role-playing game, that is something that you have to keep in heavy consideration, because it determines what so first off, relationships, real life, right? There's a human component there. The second is that you want to keep them coming back, which means that it's not just about the game at that point. There's a social layer that's on top of all of it. And in order for them to come back, they have to like you, probably, or at least like the experience enough to, in spite of you, come back. I don't think that sort of thing lasts too long, though. So, with that being the case, how we want to onboard our players is to probably give them... The tavern starts have always been a little awkward in my opinion. I agree. And if you... I know for a fact that you watched the last episode of the actual play. I have experience playing with those people. So it's easier for me to throw them right into the middle of an adventure. And I also think that more DMs can get away with that too. Even if you don't necessarily know the people that you're playing with all that well, you might be able to prep them and say, hey, I would like to bring you all in to the middle of a scene, and then we can kind of just play it out from there. Way more engaging, less safe, easy to mess up, but at the same time, I feel like a tavern scene could be similar. Like you said, awkward. It's just because people are awkward. So we're going to onboard them directly into an adventure, which means that, man, this keeps wanting to start out like super large font. We're going to say that this is... let's say... I was going to say pre-made adventure, but that doesn't really strike on the core loop of it. This is more like micro loop territory. Cognitive Rambler says your organization section goes a long way towards solving the mandatory tavern opening scene. I mean, that's a good point. I do really like that system too, because yeah, that awkwardness can be a killer, because your setup is going to determine you know, everything else to follow that. Okay, well, maybe we don't need to flesh this out. Let's just say adventure. So they go out on an adventure. What's their goal? Why do they want to do that? You know that they're going to get into conflict, but there needs to be some sort of loop in between where I would say that personal drive. So this is going to be why they want to head on down to Conflict Town. And we bake these sort of motivations in to the character story. Though it's not set in stone. I don't really like that. We give you some ideas of what your character this is me having a hard time in Photoshop. We give you some ideas of what your character could be interested in with like contacts and that sort of stuff. Let's say just personal personal drive is fine. So if we go on to the conflict, what are we doing here? There's some sort of story progression. And this could be combat. Could be nope, negotiation. It could be puzzle solving. I don't know. I don't really like those responses. So this is just like what they're doing in that conflict section, and that's because their personal drive is what brought them to the conflict, and then from that conflict, how do they reach catharsis? There's some sort of resolution that needs to occur. Okay. I feel like catharsis is just a really strong word. I probably shouldn't use it, but we're here now. So there is the what do they get from that experience? You can, character levels. That's not. I'd say that it could be this. Actually, this is story progression, which is probably not. It's probably not in this section here, because it's mostly that. And character levels, story progression. There's like equipment. This is just sort of like tangible stuff, right? It's not really catharsis. I think I'm getting caught up on that word, but you know what? I'm gonna struggle through it. It's gonna deal with it. But what gets them there? What gets them there is the group experience. Which needs to be tight. Okay. I feel like I'm missing a beat. Here, let me back it up. I'll say chosen resolution, or rather, yeah, that's probably fine. So their contacts could get involved. Their characters could die or begin dying. And, you know, I'll even say, you know, I like retirement here. Story progression, retirement, character outlook. So I don't even think it's the levels necessarily, though that's definitely a reward. It's just more material. But when I think about what the characters are actually getting out of the experience, I'm thinking of story beats. And that's what I feel like the catharsis would come from. Near experience. Okay. I'll even say just like combat victory. Or maybe just like victory in general. Or the appearance of a contact. Brush to death. Or unexpected. Some sort of unexpected outcome. So just in the world, somewhere, you might, the GM might flip the script a little bit, and then give you something that you maybe didn't even know that you wanted. Okay. All right. So that's where we end up if we get to catharsis. So what makes you want to do it again? It's more, right? We're going to say that it's also let's say that there's a, this is kind of where some of the social layer stuff comes into. What are they doing? They're certainly preparing for the next session. This feels like all real life stuff. I'm just going to list it out to get it out of my head. Actually, let's say the group experience. Okay. And we'll say just that they've had fun. They've created some sort of dopamine tunnel to where they expected the reward of catharsis, and now they want to go back to adventure, and it establishes a pattern of repeat desire. Don't be worried about it. Cool. So for adventure, real quick, we're gonna do, what does adventure entail? Going, new dangers, new places, it's probably good enough. Okay. So this is going to be our core loop for Distal, at least for the time being. And I'm going to sleep on it. I mean, whatever. When you play Distal, it's just like, you're just playing D&D. It's fine. I think I'm making this a little bit larger than it probably needs to be. But does this all make sense as far as the core gameplay loop for Distal? Does this whole conversation make sense? Do you feel like I'm missing anything in particular? Let's see. Okay. So as with conflict, we're going to narrow, actually, let's start thinking about the micro loops real quick. So within each of these larger sections of the core gameplay, you have smaller loops. We already talked about this with PlanetSide 2 or just Dungeons and Dragons, that loop between combat. And what it comes down to is the experience that they're having while they're in that node. And depending on how far zoomed out you are, the macro, it could be anything. This is very like I think defining your scope is probably necessary to have these conversations, and I think that I've done a poor job doing that. But Cognitive Rambler says that let's talk about the micro loops a little bit. So for let's go for combat just because it's the easiest portion of it. So let's say so we want to make sure that we're not venting players. Like a shopping side loop. Yes, so I agree. I feel like a lot of the stuff can probably just like branch. It's definitely more flowchart-esque than loopy loop esque. But all of these loops can just be like nested in one another, and you can drill down as far as you want. For our purposes, I'm thinking that we should establish the types of experiences that we are creating in the document, and the tools that the GM can then take. And also, I think just like the structure. So one of the things that I really appreciated about Lord of the Rings, despite not wanting to play it, is that they really know what their core loop is. For MCDM's RPG, just as an example, they do. So it's D&D like in that there's like you're going on an adventure. It's not even an adventure. It's more like you're going to solve a problem, and you kick down the doors, and you're running in, being the heroes, and engaging in combat. You finish the combat, you get a victory, which is a imagine finishing a session of something and getting a little gold star. Now, if you sleep, you lose that gold star. All the gold stars get put toward your experience, and then you level up, but you start the loop over. And that seems really, really interesting to me. I don't think it's not my bag, but they have a very similar, or they have a really clear idea for what they want that loop to be. It's push yourself in as far as you can. Then when you are when it's too dangerous to continue, that's when you sleep. And the way that they do that is like when victories give you extra abilities, and they make you like hit harder or stuff and things. And so there's momentum going forward, and then you have to reset it all. So figuring out where to reset that momentum, I think, is probably going to be a strategy. I also think that there's issues with its current, at least with its described implementation, because it encourages people to have like, I guess, like trash encounters so that they can have more victories when they go into a boss fight. That's at a raw gameplay level. That's the sort of thing that it could encourage. I think that most tables would not operate that way. You can keep the GM or the director, in the case of the MCDM's RPG, would have a pretty tight leash on that. But there's a potential for exploitation. So it's just something to consider. Okie dokie. Yeah, so when we're thinking about conflict, what sort of things that we do to make combat interesting? And I'll just kind of list off some. So I guess the loop for combat would be, well, you enter the loop with initiative, but really it's just turn, 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 etc. until the combat ends. There's definitely a lot of stuff that you can do between other people's turns. One of the things that we do to keep it interesting is that we stagger initiative. So you're not waiting for 10 enemies to go before one of your teammates gets the turn. It's enemies, allies, back and forth. It doesn't solve all those problems because you can still have, you still enter situations where you've had your turn. So now either you have reactions or you're still waiting, right? So it's something that we could probably, I don't know, kind of work with it, or it might need a little bit more work. But one thing that we do also is we, let's see, players determine who goes. And I guess I'm not even talking about loop stuff at this point. I'm talking about things that we're doing to keep players engaged. And where you can vent players, same as D&D, if the combat goes on for too long, then you're gonna have problems. I think that's about where it lives. Overall, you're fighting, I think in Distal, my expectation based on the balance of things is that for the most part, you'll be fighting closer to evenly numbered creatures. So there's going to be a lot of staggering back and forth. And I don't think you're really going to end up in a situation where a lot of people, or where you're waiting for like a lot of trash mobs to go at like the end of the order or something. Yeah. I'm going to mull that over a little bit. One system that does not exist yet, but I was thinking of, I'll call it Flea. So I was thinking about this the other day. I don't think it's going to be a rule set that makes it into the next version. But we, in session 2, and you'll see this in the VOD, but we enter a situation where you're trying to let someone not fight to the death. And I was thinking, wouldn't it be interesting if there was a formalized system for fleeing, for ending a combat early? Either, and that could become a chase scene. You know, the enemy, they say, retreat, and everybody leaves. Instead of like, well, it's not their turn yet. They can't use their movement, because that causes problems too. Realistically, there should be no reason that one person doesn't make the call to retreat, and then everybody starts booking it. Because the only reason that we're in a staggered combat is to, well, I mean, we're in combat in general. The only reason that we're in a turn-based order is to kind of make sense of the chaos. But if you don't let everybody flee at the same time, then what you're doing is it's too much game, right? Because you can like, oh, okay, well, they're not going to get their turn until whenever, therefore gang up on them before they can flee. So that sort of stuff is probably doesn't make sense, but yeah. And then like negotiating people to stand down. I think different objectives for combat. So like, actually, let's see. I'm gonna put sub objectives here because that's something that I'm really big on. Is the goal shouldn't always be kill everybody. It should be sometimes like scare people away. It should be try to survive, try to escape, take the big important thing and then get out. It should be shut down the leader, like a decapitation strike. And then at that point, everybody's probably going to scatter. That would feel more realistic. What you don't want it to do, though, is be deflating. So one of the reasons that people avoid that sort of those sorts of outcomes in D&D is because in D&D, like people are just, they throw mobs at you in so many campaign scenarios so that you can kill them. And it's fine if you're trying to fill that power fantasy, which is what a lot of D&D is structured around because it's meant to be sort of heroic fantasy. But in a game that is more grounded, sub-objectives, scaring people away, surviving is important. So I would even say like, let's copy this one down here. Survival. Death marks are permanent. Avoid combat where possible. So these aren't loops necessarily, so I'm probably getting a little bit off topic. But these are areas that you can keep people engaged when they're in this conflict section. And then depending on how you structure these three things, it can make the moving to catharsis more impactful. So let's go over here. So what's catharsis look like for folks? Koki says you could open up more mobs if you combine their attacks movement together in sort of formation system. Is that done anywhere? Not in Distal's document, but I'm partial to that as well. Usually in like mass combat situations. But I hear what you're saying as far as like the smaller scale stuff. I wonder if it makes sense for me to implement that though. It almost seems like bonus material or like a GM's guide sort of situation, like mass combat rules, right? Okay. Excuse me. Let's go down here. Okay. So for catharsis, what are we looking to give the players? Leveling. That's pretty easy. You have your class progression. I'll even lump equipment progression in here. So this is the reward portion. Doesn't have to be that though. It can be I'll say close. Oh wait, hold on. Closing a loop, which So like ending a story thread. Just the act of, if you're going through a one shot, there is this climax point where you're going to fight the last encounter, and then you'll have saved the farmer's daughter. You will have, extinguished the bandit king. You will have found the mysterious relic after fighting off, a horde of zombies or whatever. So that just the act of closing that loop is a moment of catharsis. However, it's a little bit. Oh, come on! Nobody told me that character was spelled wrong. You're all off your game. Okay, so closing a loop. Let's see, finishing the adventure, or say like returning to town, or even stuff like cutting ties with a contact, or maybe even something along those lines. There's probably better ways to phrase this, but I feel like this is probably more impactful than the actual act of leveling itself. I'll just call it closure. And then the way that we bring them here, actually, say, group experience, fine, whatever. But you can also open new loops. So you found the necromancer's grimoire and banished them. However, you also find information of where where the 3 or 7 pieces of their phylactery is located. So you have to now go on the adventures to deal with all that. So opening new loops is a good way to bring you back to adventure. And we're back to the start. Oh, what a mess this is. It's okay. I dig it. Yeah, so why don't I think I'm gonna throw another layer on top of this. And bear with me, because this is gonna get a little bit unwieldy, but we'll do it anyway. And we'll use a different color. What else goes with yeah, that works. New conglomerate colors. This is probably too light. Probably too dark. Probably just right. Okay, so we're going to talk about the social layer that's on the top. So every single node of this gameplay loop comes with it some social etiquette, potentially. Social conflict, possibly. Boredom, frustration, scheduling issues, all that sort of layer on the top. And I don't know if this is going to make sense, but we're just gonna roll with it and see what ends up shaking out. So when I think adventure, the social layer is okay. Well, I probably shouldn't reopen this. I want to lock this. Lock it. Can I lock it? Okay, you know what? I don't know how to lock it, so I'm just going to do this. Let's merge it all. Merge it all. Okay. So right here on the top, and we're going to put this in a mostly white. Okay. So when you're beginning a new adventure, what problems do you run into at the table? Scheduling. What about, let's see, player fatigue? Are they no longer interested in this story? Or interested in this character even? You might run into let's see, turnover. Characters, people who aren't a good fit. Scheduling should probably be a little micro bullet here. Cool. So we're gonna call this just challenges, and we're gonna ploop it up here. Bloop, 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 bloop. Too much. Okay. Maybe roles if people are too hardline about party composition. This is a bigger, old. Party composition is a good one too. Party comp. Definitely challenges that you face. And let's roll down to the conflict area. Okay, this is gonna get so messy. What sorts of challenges do you face socially when dealing with this? We talked about some of the stuff earlier. Blah 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 blah. Oh, okay. Blah 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 blah. No. I wanna bloop on the thing, but I don't want to cover anything up. Okay. Let's say challenges. What challenges do we face? I'll call it disinterest. Low attention span. Authority. What's a word for like not observing authority? Riot. Maybe not. I feel like that can happen a lot in a heroic setting where everyone wants to be a Chad. Yeah, absolutely. So some of the challenges that we'd face here would be disinterest at the table. So if you don't care about somebody else's, actually, and this will be another one later. Disagreement. Okay. So disagreement. And that, I mean, that can handle or happen anywhere, right? A lot of these can. So let's see. Can we find some that are specific to conflict? Non-conformity. I like that. Non-conformity. I'll say, let's just say wrong wavelength. Poor vibes. Looking for shorter words. Insubordination is definitely a word. Insubordination. That's, I feel like this is probably veering into the realm of giving somebody a little bit too much power, but hopefully it gets the point across, right? Oh, here's a... Okay, so yeah, a lot of these can take place in all the core loops. But there are some that are going to be more prevalent than others. For example, in challenges, scheduling, player fatigue, turnover, just new people at the table. That sort of thing makes sense. So disinterest, low attention span, people on their phone when you're in the middle of a combat section. That's my pet peeve. And the people that I play with can be bad about that. So the low attention span thing is normally those players play in a different way. So they're being very gracious in allowing me to play with them on stream, and they're being very good. I'm very proud of them. But like Steph, for example, she knows that she has issues paying attention, so she'll be like crocheting at the same time, which is a good way to overcome that challenge. But it requires your players to have an understanding of your expectations and then care about you enough as a person to be able to try to change or find some sort of substitute while still meeting their own needs. So yeah, that's like, figure your players out and then work with them to come up with solutions. Be very open to what your pet peeves are and that sort of thing. And if people care enough, they'll work with you. Okay, so we're gonna go to down to catharsis challenges. Interrupting an important moment. This is probably a better way to phrase that. Let's say I'll just say rude. No, that's too harsh, because that's like almost intentional. Let's say, I mean, missing social cues. Let's see, not, let's say hogging the spotlight. Like not letting somebody else have their moment of closing out a story is something that can, like, it's just, it feels bad. I mean, there's stuff on the GM side too, like GM overstepping boundaries. So if you're pushing a resolution on a player that they're not cool with, and we've seen this sort of stuff before, just kind of throughout the TTRPG community, that can cause problems too. I would say even just actually a lack of catharsis would be a problem in this particular section, right? And just having an ending that is, I'll say, I feel like there's two S's here. Dissatisfied. Okay. Conclusion. We're gonna roll with it. Don't at me. Okay. Lack of catharsis. So these are some social challenges that we could see. Actually, if I were to go back, and then let's talk about, just to add another one here. Jing being too controlling, maybe. I'm gonna get rid of poor vibes just to make room. When a GM says no to the cool thing that you're trying to do, that sucks. Okay, so we have a pretty good list of challenges that we can face in every single one of these nodes of core loop. And any one of these can be enough to push a player away from your game, or away from your table at the very least. So the last thing that I kind of want to do is what sorts of behaviors, or rather, what sorts of systems can we put in place to help resolve some of, or I guess it's a way larger discussion, but maybe we can throw in some ideas on how to create social tools to navigate these particular challenges. And it shouldn't be too crazy, because there's already a lot of good ones, right? So we'll just call it tools, with the expectation that you all know what I'm talking about. We'll say session 0. Easy. Vet your new players. Consistent schedule. Just saying, hey, at, every day on Monday, we're going to play a session with or without you. It's a way to run that for sure. Packs are a way to break party comps, right? Yes, and also I feel like, so one of my goals is that party comp doesn't really matter, because I tend to create encounters that the players are going to be able to overcome regardless of what their party composition is. And I just enjoy that style of play because it gives people freedom. There's some shadow sides to it as well, though, because you can have people who, if they're all playing the same class, then there's the potential to be boring, right? So you kind of want to divvy people up. But yes, packs are a way to cover the fundamental needs of a party, while also creating a little bit of diversity. And you see this just through the packs themselves. Like, some of them have an extra holster for this other thing over here. And if you know that that's the case, then you could probably spec, even if everybody's playing cuppers, you can spec your cuppers a little bit differently than the other cuppers. Off-session workshops, discussion to hammer out issues. So yeah, well, let's just say, so workshops is good. I like that. You know what? Let's just say offline threads. So if you have a text chat with your friends, or if you have an email thread, or just an email for them to like hit you up with concerns, it's a good way to resolve that. So we're gonna throw that in to tools. Good job. I like it all. Well, we're gonna need to find some space for this at some point. It's fine. Everything's fine. A lot of these rely on interpersonal skills. Might be a pretty thick manual when you try to fix it. For sure. So it's, just ideas for ways to shape this experience. So challenges for like disinterest. Let's say let people, or I'll say set table expectations. Set turn timers. Let's, for the GM side, see, for the GM side, I think you would say, so instead of like being too controlling, determine I want to say like the boundaries, like the boundary box that your players are going to play in, right? And this, it just comes back to expectations realistically, but determine how much control they have over their story, what sorts of experiences. Let's see. we'll call it narrative or rules as written. What's your preference? Because if the GM is like too controlling, it could be that there is a mismatch between what their expectations are and what your expectations are. Because you'll have a lot of players who just want to like, they just want to like hang out and do fun things. But if you don't have any structure, then things can very quickly go off the rails. Let's call it narrative or raw. Let's see, what are some other things? So table, expectations, turn timers. Let's see, disagreements. An arbitration clause. Is that a thing? So if there are disagreements, GM should have final say. And setting that expectation, again, is worth doing up front. You can certainly try. Yeah. Okay. I think that's pretty good. If you have any more, please let me know. My dog just farted. It is awful. It is sewage. Ridiculous. I can't even concentrate anymore. Man, okay. My eyes are going to start burning. Let's see. Challenges for so hogging the spotlight. So catharsis in general. I had one that I was thinking of earlier. What are some tools here? I had one for this. It was so good, and I can't remember what it was. Let's see. Session 0. Vet your new players. Consistent schedule. Offline threads. Oh. Okay, maybe it wasn't that good. What am I doing? Tools. Feedback forms. So this is probably more. Maybe this isn't like catharsis. This is. I think it's like it lives here, right? Like you've already gone through your session. I'm just gonna throw this up here for fun, but we'll pop back down here. What do you got? What do you think? Communication. Same thing, like email threads. What did I write earlier? Offline threads. Oh, okay. Yeah. Rambler says we have house rule called social initiatives. So basically, RP social town sequences. People roll to take turns in doing their. Oh, that's nice. I like that. Social initiative. That's fun. Let's see, one that I was thinking of. Call pause. So, out of game, set the tone for the players. And this can happen at any point, right? So if you're having, if there's any sort of disagreement, or if there's a misunderstanding or too many questions, you can always just say like, actually, I did this in the next session. You're going to see it Tuesday. Actually, it's going to be cut out. The whole thing's going to be cut out. But I paused the game and said, you so basically there was like some discussion of whether or not they should rest before they move into another potentially dangerous encounter. And I was brought them out of game, and I said, "Hey, here are some things that you should know about what you're walking into, what the current rules are for healing, and the sorts of expectations that you can have." There was some reassurance that I wasn't trying to railroad them. I did tell them that like I have way more planned if you go this direction, but I'm not trying to push you that direction. You can go back this other direction. That's totally fine. Because a lot of times you can have a situation where the players don't want to disappoint you. Actually, and something we should probably write down is that the players can sometimes take the game off the rails. There's memes about this all the time, where they'll get attached to one little bit of information that the GM threw in and then chase that, and like that's the new campaign now. So you can have definitely can run into those sorts of issues. Let's see, tools, communication, social initiative, call, pause. I'll say out of game discussion. Try to turn an unsatisfying resolution into new motivation for further adventure could be a thing. Yeah, I did that. Let's see, how would we convey that? I would say establish like a point to wrap up. Establish an end point. So you can, as a GM, you can say that there's a conclusion, and then I need to talk to you about it, and we can figure out where we're going to pick up next session. Or you could just tell people that you're like that you're not really sure how to resolve something. And a lot of times that's enough to like, so first off, you're asking for involvement. So I want your opinion. Please help me figure out this cool thing so that we can create a better story. That is, oftentimes that's enough. If you just like ended it on a sour note, then yeah, the people leaving due to frustration would be super, would be more prominent. So just, I think if there's any takeaway here when it comes to the social stuff, it's just communication wins. Love wins. Okay, if we let's see. Oh, what? Will this make sense? An IOU? A resolution IOU? A deferred resolution? Deferred resolution? Maybe? Is it 2 hours? I think there's 2 hours. It sounds like I'm trying to get a loan or something. It's fine. Okay, and just to follow up on this real quick, feedback forms is a super helpful tool. Let's see. And some of the stuff that you're saying, just about making the unsatisfying resolution and turning it into a new motivation, you can plan the next session. Or let's say plan with the player. Just what they're looking to do next. And then let's also say, I think that's it. That's all I got for that one. It's like interim Tools. There we go. What a beautiful mess. What a lovely mess. So as we mentioned, like any of these sections can churn players if you don't have enough to keep them engaged. But in a TTRPG, it's really these blue areas that are going to get you caught up, or rather have a high likelihood of pushing away players because they're very easy to mess up, and we're attached to them on a personal level because that's where the human experience is coming, right? All the mechanical stuff, yeah, it could be obnoxious, but I think that you're more likely to get a pass so long as you're well connected on the personal level. All right, I think that's all I have. I don't know if there's like an end goal with all these words here, but hopefully, if anything, it gave people something to think about. Let's give them something to think about. A little core loop, let's work it out. What am I looking for? Okay, well, it's probably good enough. Yeah, I think that is where we're going to end this particular stream. Thank you all for hanging out. Thank you for sharing feedback, thoughts. This actually gives me a little bit more insight into where I could potentially take Distal. But I feel like this is a pretty overall, I feel like this is pretty standard as far as a loop is concerned for, like Dungeons and Dragons or Pathfinder or another tabletop role-playing experience that requires a GM to play through. I think our focuses are just like a little bit more macro in this particular case, but maybe not. Maybe not. All right, well, thank you all so much, and I'll catch you next time. Boobity bobbity boo. Tickety bow.